Thanks for everybody to come out. You're not staying home watching the Cardinals game tonight. I call this portable radio operation with a subtitle of "Make Contacts in Unusual Places While Avoiding Chigger Bites," which is certainly a hazard here in Missouri. I'm originally from the state of Maryland, and I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid. Didn't have that problem back there. But when I came to Missouri in 1970, I found out about them the hard way. Anyhow, why go operate portable? Well, public service is one reason. This club, through Rebecca, sponsors or helps with communications for 2 bike rides every year. Also, public service for emergency communications. That's all VHF stuff. Another reason are operating events. There are commemorative events. Some of you may remember they had a Route 66 commemorative here a few years ago. Anniversary, I thought one that was really obscure was a Doc Savage anniversary. For those of you who are old-time science fiction fans, there was a guy, Lester Dent, I think was the author, and he's from Missouri. And he wrote all these stories about Doc Savage. And somebody decided to put a commemorative thing on the air. Another reason, of course, are the state QSO parties. I know our president, Kyle, likes to participate in those. There are other events, islands on the air, IOTA, national parks on the air was popular here a few years ago. Summits on the air is popular out in the Pacific Northwest, or maybe you're going to go out and you're going to activate a rare grid or a rare county for the county hunters. The last one, CPOTA, is one I made up for Missouri, since we don't have any islands. We don't really have any, well, I guess we got a national park or 2. We don't have any summits. That one stands for cow pastures on the air. Another reason you might want to go out is home antenna restrictions, or maybe it's just really noisy and you can't operate around your house. By that I mean electrical noise. And of course, there's ARRL Field Day, always the 4th weekend of June. The club, of course, does that event. And finally, it's fun. Maybe I'm showing my age here, but because nowadays you can sit in the park somewhere with your cell phone, as long as you have cell coverage, you can direct dial your buddy in Australia, no big deal. But I always thought it was kind of cool to sit out in the weeds somewhere with a radio and talk to somebody across the country or even across the ocean. You can go anywhere from an hour or 2 of operation at a park bench, just low power, 5 watts or 10 watts on 20 or 40 meters. I know there's some people that like to backpack and carry their radios with them. In fact, there's been some stuff in QST off and on. Mountain toppers, the Pacific Northwest, there's a number of guys. I belong to the Pacific Northwest VHF Society, or actually I subscribe to it, and I'm continually getting emails. The guy says, "Oh, I'm going to be out on this mountain this Saturday with the following radio gear, and look for me." But a lot of people like to do that. And of course, you can have a multi-operator weekend exercise for a contest. Field Day, I've heard designators as high as 13 alpha. That means 13 transmitters in one place. And I don't know how they do that without jamming each other. Our club usually operates 3A, although last year it was 4 alpha. But it counts only HF transmitters. The VHF transmitters are free. Where to go? Well, rare locations are nice. It's really fun to be DX. And that I mean, you don't necessarily have to go to some exotic place to be DX. Yeah, if you go to VP6 or something like that, yeah, it's pretty neat. I spent a year in the Navy down in Guantanamo Bay when KG4 was not a common call. And the station manager hated me because they used the station mostly to run phone patches back to the States for the sailors down there, because there was really no other communication from down there for the people. But the station manager used to hate me because I'd get on and just operate someone 20 meters, and he'd get all these QSL cards. He was getting mad at me for having to fill out all the cards. So it's fun to be DX. Public parks are a pretty good location. If you want to stay overnight, you really need to get advance permission from the park ranger, though. And some parks have pretty severe restrictions. There's one in a very rare grid spur, forgive me, I'm a VHF nut, out off the California coast at Santa Rosa Island, and the whole island is a national park. And they have a restriction: no generators, no structures, so it becomes very difficult to put up an antenna. In fact, the only what I would call really successful expedition to that grid took a boat and went out and anchored off the island for a couple of days. There have been several guys have gone out and set up temporary stations on the island running battery power, but it hadn't really worked a lot of people. So that's one thing to consider. For example, if you wanted to get down and put the Archer in the air again, I don't really know what would be involved in doing that, but there might be some severe restrictions. Private property, of course, go get permission of the landowner. And if you're going to operate from a campground, I find the tent-only ones really more desirable, and the RV parks are not always good due to interference. My wife's niece has and her husband have this 32-foot camper, and they love to go places around Missouri, and they always invite us to go along, and I've at least taken my mobile rig along. And if I get within 50 yards of that camper, I can't hear anything. It is just noisy, and worse yet, the campground usually has some sort of a store or other central area that'll have video games or something in it, and it can be pretty noisy. So I don't recommend those. And plus the fact you may interfere with other people's enjoyment by jamming their TV or something. And of course, do consider safety in choosing the site, accessibility in case you have an accident, and of course there's always a possibility of bad people. That's a couple ARES related, well, the first one is ARES related. That's me out on a 2-meter site simulating communications with a hospital. I'm just using my van with an antenna mounted on the back of it. The one on the right was done some years ago. A friend of mine and I went down to Echo Mike 47, which is down in St. Genevieve, and put 6 and 2 meters on the air digitally. There were some people that wanted to work that grid on 6 and 2 meters digitally. And so we went down and set up and operated from a field day site down there. That was actually done on field day. I have a friend, Lloyd Johnson, K7NX. Lloyd has gone some places to put some really rare grids on the air on 6 meters. That one on the left is Delta Mike 31, which is the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Park down in Arizona. There's very little of that grid in the USA. Lloyd said that's the only one where he went armed because he's right down on the Mexican border. The other rare grid is Delta Nancy 00 out in Utah, and I think the picture probably gives you an idea why it's pretty rare. There's not much there. For operation, well, you can do about anything you can do at home. HF, low power HF, VHF, UHF, or microwave. There's a group here in St. Louis, the St. Louis Area Microwave Society, that does microwave operations. I know they'll have Saturdays where guys will say, yeah, I'm going out to this particular location with my 10 gigahertz rig, and they make prearranged schedules to make contacts with one another. Of course, you can do sideband, CW digital, or satellite. There is a satellite VUCC award, that's VHF, UHF Century Committee for working 100 grids. And of course also Islands on the Air and other kinds of awards. One bit of advice: if you're going to go to a rare location, advertise in advance. And the other thing, particularly if you're doing this at VHF, is pick a frequency and a mode and stick to it. Because there may be somebody trying to work you from far away, and conditions are not always all that good, and they got to know where to look, where to listen. And of course, if possible, log on to some kind of a website for coordination. Again, I'm VHFer, so ON4KST, Slack.com now has a VHF, a guy's got a thing set up there where you can log on to Slack, and there's another meteor scatter site called Ping Jockey. If anybody here, is anybody here in the county hunters? No county hunters. There's like over 3,000 counties in the USA, and county hunters try to work somebody from every county of the US. In fact, I know one guy that was on his third time around in that, and I thought, once is more than enough. Okay, talking about microwave portable, this was taken at the Central States VHF Society conference here a few years ago. These guys had their 10 gigahertz station set up out back and showing off the hardware. Right now, if you want to go portable, and HF 20 and 40 are probably your best choices, because the antennas are usually pretty small and you get decent propagation. If we ever get any sunspots back, the higher bands are going to be a lot more fun, because you get longer DX and the antennas are smaller and easier to put up. I say 12-meter portable might be quite popular. I don't think there's a whole lot of activity on 12 meters these days, so people who are trying for all band worked all states or something like that might like to find you on 12 meters. And even now, 10 meters can be fun during the June to August E-skip season, although it's a lot more fun during the peak of the sunspot cycle when you can put up a 8-foot whip antenna and work Europe. Contesting. It seems like just about all the states have some sort of a QSO party. I know Missouri does in the spring, and that's sponsored by the Boeing Club. The Illinois QSO party is coming up here a couple weeks. And people go out, I guess the rules in those are you can go out to a rare county, let's say, and get on the air, put the county on the air. Here in Missouri, I would say heading down south would probably be, there's probably some counties down there that don't have very much in them, and no hams, so you might be rather popular. VHF contests. ARRL sponsors 3. There's one in June, one in September, and one in January. CQ magazine sponsors a CQ Worldwide VHF contest, and excuse me. The scoring is typically a number of QSO points times the number of grids worked. And the nice thing is, if you have multiple bands, you get to add up all the points, and you add up all the grids, multiply the two together, and that's your score. And you can work the same station once per band. For example, if I work K0DOK on 6.2 and 432, that's 1 point each for the 6 and 2, 2 points for the 432 contact, and 3 grids. So that's 12 points right there. That's the way the scoring works. ARRL has a lot of different categories for entries. I'm going to talk about this a little more at Winterfest. That's what I'm doing on the contest calendar, or contest university thing, is talking about VHF contesting. But one of the categories they've got is called a rover. And it's people that go out and rove around various grid squares. And the thing that's different about it is you can rework them every time they move to a new grid square, and likewise, they can rework stations they worked before every time they move. The CQ Worldwide is 6 and 2 meters only. ARRL is basically 6 meters to light. Give you an idea what rovers look like. This again is from the Central States VHF Society. There's kind of 2 ways to do it. These guys have a whole bunch of gear in their car, and it's mostly microwave bands. And these guys, like this, they go through like 5 or 6 or more grid squares. They drive a lot, and they may only stop for an hour or two at a given location. And they try to work a whole bunch of people on all those bands to run up their score. The guy on the bottom has a little different philosophy. He may only go to 3 or 4 grids, but he puts the antennas up higher and tries to make more contacts from those locations. And of course, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. I took this picture out at the Washington, Missouri Amfest back when it was held out at the city park out there, and I didn't look in the car to see if he had radios to go with all those antennas, but I was talking to a friend of mine down in North Carolina, and I sent him this picture, and I said, "See, we got guys like this around here." He says, "This guy's a piker." So he sent me that picture. I don't know if that's the same car or not, but I think you could have a lot of fun with this picture. Like, who around here is old enough and had a lot of experience with the radios? You could go through all the pictures and say, what brand radio is that one? What is that one? So the guy said he solved his problem, though. He put 10 batteries in his trunk to keep it going. Okay, what do you do for power? Well, you can battery power stuff. A little gel cell is really good for an afternoon's operation with a QRP station. I don't, however, recommend trying to use your big rig, your 100-watt radio, at low power. And I got some numbers up there based on some equipment I have that I just measured to show you what happens. The FT817, for those who are not familiar, is a little 5-watt QRP rig by Yaesu. It draws about 370 milliamps on receive. And on transmit, it draws about 1.7 amps to make 5 watts out. That's not too bad. I have an IC706 Mark II-G, just receive, it draws 1.1 amps. And transmit with no RF output, just key in the mic, was 3.5 amps. So you can see, if you want the battery to live, don't use your high power radio on a small battery. Now, something like an Elecraft KX2 or KX3 will be more in the vicinity of the FT817, so the battery life would be reasonable. I also don't recommend using your car battery, especially if the battery is 3 or 4 years or more old. The capacity is down, and if you must do that, make sure you have a set of jumper cables or a booster pack. And the other thing that happens is some radios will misbehave if the battery voltage gets too low. You get down around 11 or 10 and a half, and remember, there is voltage drop in the cables. The radio may start doing bad things when you transmit. Either distorted signals or spurious signals. Or
do you use these step-up switching supplies to boost that back up?
You can. There was one on sale here a few years back that ARR, I think MFJ makes one that's probably okay. I found some of the boards from those things on the internet here a couple of years ago, and they turned out to be really great EMI generators. But after I added some line filtering on the input and the output, they're okay now. But yeah, so you can do that. But again, you got to be careful not to kill your battery.
Have you ever tried solar, Joe, to augment
I'm sorry?
Solar? Have you ever used any solar panels to augment your power?
No, I haven't, but you could do that. You certainly could do that.
So, several years ago at Field Day, and I forget his name, I think he moved from town, he set up a solar station.
Right.
Bill, Rebecca, you guys remember that? I forget who it was. It was a Field Day. He had a solar, it was quite involved to set up, though. That was a disadvantage.
Yeah.
It took about an hour to set it up, I think.
Well, solar panel efficiency, at least for the cheaper cells, is only 5 or 10%. It's not real high. So, you're looking for 100-watt cells. pretty big piece of hardware to set up. Now, admittedly,
Fold up, and I've got a couple of them.
do you?
But yeah, that big.
Yeah, you could do that because I would think gee, a 100-watt cell would be probably 7 or 8 amps, and
0.65 at full sunlight.
okay, that would certainly be enough unless you really transmitted a lot. I think that'd be enough to keep your batteries up. So that's one I didn't mention here, but that's certainly a possibility. There's a newer kind of battery available too, called the lithium iron phosphate cell, and I don't own one, but I've talked to people who do. They're expensive, but they work great, and probably the two big features about them is they weigh somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 as much as an equivalent sealed lead acid battery. And the other good feature is they provide full voltage down to like 80 to 90% discharge before the voltage starts to sag. A typical sealed lead acid battery, as soon as you start drawing charge out of it, the voltage starts to sag, and by the time you get down to having the battery fully discharged, the voltage may be down to 10.5 or so, which is really down to the point where the radio doesn't like it. One outfit that sells it is Bieno, and that's the link to their website. You do got to buy a special charger with it too. But as I said, they're kind of expensive. I think a 20 amp hour battery was like $200. It's not cheap, but the other thing is they have a really long cycle life. You buy one and it should be all you ever need. Or you can use a little generator. However, make sure you can use the generator at the site where you're going. There are places that don't permit them. And without mentioning any brand names, I recommend avoiding cheap generators. I bought a little 800-watt job here about 5 years ago, and I thought, boy, this thing is just perfect for what I want. And I brought it home, and it was a 2-stroke engine, so I wasn't too happy with that. But I thought, oh well, I can use it. I fired it up, and I thought, well, let's test it. And voltmeter puts out 115 volts, and I thought, well, let's see how it behaves with a varying load. So I hooked up my weed whacker, which draws about 300 watts or so. Pulled the trigger, voltage sagged down to about 75 volts, then came back up to about 115. I thought, that's not too good, and I let go of the trigger, and it shot up to about 160 volts, and came back down to 115. I said, I don't think I want to hook my radio to this. So, word to the wise, be a little careful. Some generators, like the little 2 kW Honda ones, are great. They're expensive, but the little cheapy $80 ones, I don't know. Maybe they're better these days, but I wouldn't take the chance personally. Battery packs, I overdid it again, but I had a couple of 30 ampere gel cells, which that's kind of why I walk like this a little sometimes. I'm carrying the thing. It is heavy. Antennas, if you're going to operate HF, I recommend using wire antennas, especially if you're going to use QRP. You want to try to use a fairly efficient antenna. So a dipole or an end-fed wire, I don't have an end-fed wire yet, but I'm about to. I found an article on the internet how to make one, and I've got the matchbox made up, and all I got to do really is cut a piece of wire and take it out and try it out. The nice thing about those, they're half wavelength long, so at 40 meters it'd be about 65 feet. And you can also use it on 20 meters, or 15 or 10. Now you do need a tuner in your radio to use those because it's not a perfect match. They are commercially available too from Soda Beam, and I know MFJ's makes them too. Peter Brisbane, I think, has one, and I was talking to him about his, and he said it really works well. And it's just a simple end-fed long wire. Verticals, I tried making vertical antennas. I thought this would be a really neat way to make portable antennas. They're not really efficient due to poor grounding. And of course, you need a way to get the wires up in the trees. My answer to that was this kludge down here with a Harbor Freight slingshot and a spinning reel, and it works, sort of.
Can I interrupt for a second? Just be aware, if you're going into, a lot of parks will not allow you to put anything in a tree, even a wire. So
Okay.
ensure that the location that you're going to allows you to do that. I don't believe any national park will allow you to touch their trees. I know a lot of county parks in St. Louis and St. Charles County will not allow you to do that either.
Yeah, we've never,
Our QRP group here got kicked out of Klondike Park once,
really,
putting up wire antennas.
we've never run into that problem. I guess we've gone out for field day, but thanks for the alert. I'm not aware of that. I've not had that problem, but maybe I've just been lucky.
Have you ever used the push-up fiberglass poles?
Yeah, whoops, let me back up. Yes, I have, and I've got some stuff coming up on that in a minute. You can also do magnetic loop antennas. However, I made one. This thing is basically a piece of 3/8 soft copper pipe, 10 feet long, with a tuning capacitor mounted in a box down here. The hard part to find is the tuning capacitor, because if you want to make a 100-watt version of this thing, you end up with about 4,000 volts across that capacitor. And even at low power, it can be as much as 1,000 volts. And the efficiency is pretty poor at 40 meters, like minus 12 dBi or something. And if you really want to look into this, just go look for magnetic loop antennas on the internet, and there's just a ton of information out there, how to make them and how they work. But the one thing about it is it's a small antenna, it's easy to set up. Other temporary antennas, the club owns a trans-world antenna, which some of you may have seen at field day. It looks like a letter H lying on its side. It covers 10 through 20 meters. It's a bit expensive. I think you can probably end up with $700 invested in it by the time you get all the stuff, but it does work. If you're going to operate VHF, you really ought to have small beams. And what I mean by this next comment, if the choice is between antenna size and height wins. In other words, if you got a big, long 6-element, 6-meter beam, and you can only get it up 10 feet because it's too heavy, but you've got a shorter 4 or 5-element beam, you can get up 30 feet, go for the 30 feet, you're better off. Here's a go box I put together back, we were talking about doing HF operations with ARES. It's a Harbor Freight toolbox, which I just carry a bunch of different antennas. It's got material in there to make 75, 40, or 20-meter wire antenna. And I did put the verticals in there, although I'm not really sure why, because they don't work all that well. Little 2-meter ground plane. I got coax and tools and adapters and instructions. You may say, why instructions? Well, I put this thing together a couple of years ago, and I may not remember if I get out there one day and I have to use this in a hurry. Just how did I have all this put together? Talk about antenna mounts. I had made a trailer hitch mount to go on the back of my car. That's actually a piece of TV mast, a sawed-off piece of TV mast. Another one is a board mounted on the ground that I can sort of nail to the ground, and that's basically a towel rod sticking up out of the wood there. And I just slide the telescoping mast down over that. Some years ago at Winterfest, somebody was selling push-up aluminum poles. They're about 18 feet total, I think. And I, as usual, went overboard and bought 2 of them. And I adapted those to use as antenna mounts. And that's what, in the picture on the far right, that's what's holding up the antenna on the back of my van. I'm using this trailer hitch mount and that mount back there that push-up pole. I could have pushed it up further, except it was running into the tree where I took the picture. Finally, talk about equipment package. I've seen some really neat Pelican Go boxes from people at ARES where you just take the front off, take the back off, and it's all right there. I thought I'd use a cheap Harbor Freight toolbox where I have to actually take it out of the box. But that piece of wood has a IC706 Mark II-G, antenna tuner, a digital interface, and a 30 amp power supply on the left, and it can be either run off of 12, the whole setup can either be run off 12 volts or 115 volts AC. A couple tips. This is one, put all your station together at home before you go out, if you're going to do this, including setting up the antenna. Because invariably, if you don't do that, you'll get out in the field and you either forgot something, something's broken, or something doesn't work. I recommend testing the cables, and if you can, take some spares, but if you're backpacking, obviously you don't want to carry any more than you have to. And keep it simple. As you can see, I didn't really do that. I got too much stuff in those boxes, but I was designing for flexibility. But if you're going to go out, try to keep the package as small as possible and as simple as possible. Make a checklist just to make sure you have all the tools and the adapters you'll need. If you're going to stay there for a while, you need tables or chair and maybe a canopy for some shade. And if you're going to do something digital, keep in mind you may not be able to read your displays in bright sun, which you can't. I said might be hard. It's usually impossible in my experience. In fact, I even had trouble at field day last year reading a display on my laptop, and I was under the pavilion. And of course, remember the personal comfort stuff. Water, snacks, bug spray, and all that good stuff. Here about 4 or 5 years ago, ARES had an exercise down at Jefferson Barracks. We operated from inside the building and set up our antennas outside. This is when I found out the vertical didn't work very well. Over on the far right side of the picture, well, let me do it with a cursor if I can. Over here, I had my 40-meter vertical set up, and I was trying to work Jefferson City with it. Didn't have a whole lot of luck. Meanwhile, some other guy came along with his wind link set up on 40 meters, another ham. He had a dipole. That held up the center. The ends of the dipole were practically on the ground. He had no problem. Although he ran some wind links out to Colorado. The other antennas in this picture are, this is a government multi-band thing, and then there's another one, I don't even remember what that was, sticking over here. It wasn't ours. This is the one I was so embarrassed at the poor performance that I went rushing home afterwards and made myself a dipole. All right, 1987. Grids were fairly new on VHF. They just started in 1983, and there were 3 of us wanted to go activate Echo Mike 49, which is north of here. In fact, Quiver River State Park is just barely in the grid. So we went up there and scouted out a location to park, and I talked to the park ranger and said, you know, we'd like to come in here and set up at this intersection overnight. And he said, fine, you can do that. So we went up there on Saturday morning and set up our stuff and had just monster E-skip openings over the weekend on 6 and 2 meters. The band 6 opened about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was open all afternoon, all evening, all night, all the next morning until we quit. In fact, the skip got so good that Sunday morning, the 2 guys in the 2 meter tent worked Florida and Baja, California, Baja in Mexico on 2 meter sideband, if you believe that. And I got the cards to prove it. Sunday morning, we had some tropo on 220 and 432, so that came to pass too. Noontime came along, we quit with over 100,000 point score, and I've got a few pictures here of the setup I'm going to talk about a little bit. I had the Suburban at the time, and the 6-meter antenna is set up right there, if you can see the cursor.
Nope.
Whoops, I didn't want to do that yet. 220 and 432 are over here. Frank had a pickup truck with a 30-foot push-up mast. This thing keeps insisting on doing that. This is a closer picture of the 220 and 432. I had made up this array of 4 antennas for 432. Down here was the 2-meter station under a canopy, and we were using the tailgate of my Suburban. That's 6 meters over here, and then 220 and 432 were set up on this side. Pardon?
Your cursor's not coming through to the screen, I don't think.
I'm sorry, I still didn't get it.
Your cursor is not showing up on the screen,
Oh.
I don't think.
I'm sorry. Okay, well this is the station down here. That was 6 meters. This is 220 and 432. 2 meters was over there. This was the 2-meter antenna. Here's a 6-meter antenna up here and the 432 antenna, so you can see in the side view. We put the generator out in front of my truck basically to keep the noise down. Anyhow, we had a great time, but about noon Sunday, it was getting hot and a gust of wind came along, and that's how it ended. Believe it or not, what had happened, I had not anchored the bottom end of this very well on the ground, and when the wind came along, it just flipped it right over and it broke. I had made a wooden bracket to have it connected to the roof rack on the Suburban, and it just ripped that right off. Fortunately, those are all homemade wooden antennas, and believe it or not, I still have them all, and they all work. I took it all apart, kind of straightened out a few bent elements, and away we went. So, and the sequel to this story is I called up the park ranger. We had so much fun that year that we wanted to go back the following year and do it again. And I said, gee, you know, we had a great time up there last year. Can we come back next year? He says, not no, but hell no. Why? What happened? He says, all I got was complaints all weekend from people down the campground who couldn't watch TV. Now, the funny part of it was, it probably wasn't our fault. Band conditions were such that weekend that there ain't no way they were watching channels 2 through 6. I mean, there's probably at least 3 TV stations on every channel. But we got stuck with it. Anyhow, that's it. So are there any questions? If not, thank you all.
What do you use for coax on your portable setups?
For HF, I try to use RG58, just because it's light, or RG8X maybe. For the VHF, I try to use RG213, the bigger stuff. It depends on how long the cable has to be, but for 50 feet, RG213 is good.
When your verticals didn't work, did you have any radials out?
Yeah, I did. I meant to bring one along to show it, and I forgot. What I did to make radials, I had 4 of them. I got some 30-foot Harbor Freight tape measures and added a 3-foot wire on it to give it a way to connect it to the base. And I had 4 of those out, but
The 4's not enough. You answered the question.
yeah, it really wasn't enough to be effective. Yeah, Bill?
4 didn't measure up.
You had the one slide that mentioned,
That's the Washington Tonight Show last night.
you had the one slide that mentioned, you know, do a dry pitch, set everything else.
Yeah.
Set everything else and at home. I would add to that, make sure that when you take it down to go, you pack all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I've shown up more than once with, oh, it's still on the desk.
Well, see, that's kind of what happened to me. I didn't try that vertical out before I went down to JB, and I should have. I tested it in the sense I went out and I checked it. Yeah, it matches good, but it turned out it was more of a worm warmer than it was a radio antenna. Cliff?
Yeah, from personal experience, be sure they had operating manual to your checklist.
Yeah,
I learned that the hard way.
yeah, I guess that's true too. I'm pretty familiar with my radio, so I didn't think about doing that, but yes, sir.
I can tell you why your generator didn't work. Those cheap little generators, they only have a governor on the engine that controls the speed of what the generator puts out.
Right.
As soon as they're loaded, it comes way down. The other expensive ones, they're inverter generators. With
Yeah.
the generator feeds an inverter, which will give you constant output. That's why they're more expensive.
Actually, I have a bigger and a heavier one right now. It's a 2.5 kW one, but it's not an inverter generator, but it does just fine. I mean, I can do that same trick with it, and the voltage might fluctuate a volt or two, but it's,
Flywheel, so it doesn't change anything.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can hear the engine kind of grunt a little bit when you put a load on it, but at least the voltage stays put.
Are the inverter generators clean?
The Hondas are.
They're very clean.
I wouldn't bet about the Harbor Freight ones. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Prices of lithium-ion batteries, I guess, have come way down. 100 amp hour lithium-ion batteries, right at, depending on where you buy it, 180 to 200 bucks.
Really? Wow. I just, at Bayonne, it was a lot more expensive than that because a 100 amp hour one's like 500 bucks.
Lithium iron phosphate.
Lithium iron phosphate.
Yeah.
All right.
LiFePO4.
Yeah, the 100 amp hour Bayonne was like 500 bucks. I mean, it's like, whew, wow.
Yeah, they're-
Yes, sir. I just looked them up the other day. Did you have a question?
The picture of the rover with the 30-foot antenna,
Uh-huh.
does he drive around with that?
I kind of doubt it. He goes around and sets up somewhere and operates, I guess. There still are, if you listen during the VHF contest, you'll hear there's still some guys around here that rove. I don't know what their setups look like, but I've worked a few of them.